Hello and welcome everybody. I am Wendy Hardwick. I'm an MTSS specialist with the SPDEG grant at the Oklahoma State Department of Education. And we are here today to talk about Tier 1 foundations. I'm happy to introduce Emily Trowbridge, who serves as the program director for the $60 million Oklahoma Comprehensive Literacy State Development Grant, also known as the OSLSD, at the Oklahoma State Department of Ed. In this role, she oversees the strategic and financial success of the grant, managing implementation and progress across 20 sub-granted districts statewide. With almost 17 years of experience in public education, Emily has served as a pre-K through 8 principal, a math interventionist, instructional coach, and classroom teacher. Her leadership is grounded in data-driven decision-making, instructional development, and a strong commitment to improving student outcomes through effective systems of support. Emily is passionate about empowering educators, aligning instruction with MTSS framework, and building collaborative cultures that foster both academic and behavioral growth. Along with Emily, we're proud to present Marlo Lee. She's a passionate advocate for instructional excellence in education. She currently serves as the program manager for OKMTSS at the Oklahoma State Department of Education, where she leads statewide efforts to strengthen MTSS implementation, building sustainable systems of support for all learners. Marlo brings over 25 years of experience in education. She served as an elementary principal, reading specialist, and teacher with a strong focus on data-driven school improvement. She's achieved national board certification, holds a letters micro-credential, and was nominated for a Science of Reading Shining Star. Most recently, Marlo was a Medal for Excellence finalist in Elementary Secondary Administration and presented on active learning and engagement at the National Blue Ribbon Schools of Excellence National Conference. Marlo holds a master's degree in reading and school leadership and is actively pursuing her doctorate in curriculum and instruction, further deepening her commitment to research-based practice and continuous improvement. Known for her collaborative leadership style and ability to inspire teams, she empowers educators to create inclusive, high-impact learning environments that help every child thrive. We're happy to present Marlo and Emily today on Tier 1, Building the Foundations. Thank you for being here, Emily and Marlo.
Thank you for having us. We're excited to be here. I know we're both very passionate about MTSS, so thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you. We're so excited to be here and to share with you today. So I'm going to share my screen here real quick and we'll jump right in. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Let's see.
If you go to slideshow, I think if you hit that button.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Now we've got it.
Perfect. Looks great.
Great. Okay. MTSS Tier 1, Building the Foundation, Strengthening Universal Instruction for All Learners. We all know you can't build a strong house on a weak foundation, and so that's what we will be discussing today. I'm going to skip past this since Wendy gave us such a great introduction already. And we'll start here by looking at what MTSS is. MTSS is a proactive and preventative framework that integrates data and instruction to maximize student achievement and support students' needs from a strength-based perspective. There are 3 tiers to the framework. Tier 1 for all students and is a universal support. This refers to the core curriculum provided for each subject area and behavior. 80% of students should be successful with these supports. If they are not successful, more intensive practices should be implemented at Tier 1 to support 80% to demonstrate proficiency. Tier 2 is for some students and is targeted supports based on standardized protocols for evidence-based intervention and instruction. 10 to 15% of students are proficient with tier 1 and tier 2 supports. And then tier 3 is for few students and is intensive supports based on standardized protocols for evidence-based intervention and instruction. 3 to 5% of students are proficient with all 3 levels of support. Okay, there are 5 domains within MTSS: screening, progress monitoring, database decision-making, multi-level prevention system, and infrastructure. Today, we will be focusing on multi-level prevention system. And then we have the OKMTSS framework with the 3 columns there. And the circle is around the evidence-based practices components. That's what we will be focusing on today. Okay, today's objectives: we will strengthen systems of tier 1 to build a strong foundation as we discuss the instructional core, assessment and data, classroom environment and behavior, leadership and professional development, and then outcomes and continuous improvement. Hopefully we have time to get all of that in. If you were part of the SPDIG cohort for this month, you completed a tier 1 audit. And so these are the main components of the tier 1 audit. So we're going to go into detail about those so that makes sense with what you've already done. Okay, why tier 1 matters. Tier 1 is the universal instruction every student receives. It must be strong, accessible, and consistent. You can think of it like a building's foundation, the base layer of a cake, or daily habits for personal health. MTSS begins with tier 1. If it's not working, nothing else will. Dr. Amanda Vanderhayden. So why is a solid foundation important? 1, it holds up the rest of the structure. You guys know that if your foundation is weak and you try to build something on top of it, it's not going to hold. It keeps the structure from falling even through weathering, storms, and changes in the environment. And it prevents gaps and cracks from forming to create a tight structure. So, if you don't have a strong foundation of tier 1 instruction, then gaps and cracks instruction will start to form and then widen as they go. So number 1 is the instructional core. The instructional core is involves curriculum alignment vertically and to standards. It involves evidence-based practices like explicit instruction, modeling, and scaffolding, differentiation without lowering expectations. We'll talk a little more about that in depth, high student engagement, and access for all learners, including EL students and students with disabilities. So let's look at each one of those a little more in depth. So curriculum alignment. We should focus on aligning our curriculum with our state standards, and the frameworks are there for all educators and really are a great resource. So if you click, I linked this one in here. This is just the ELA framework. So let's go to that real quick. Hopefully I can get back to my PowerPoint. But if you go to, say, the ELA framework and you go down to literacy progressions, this is one of my favorites. And then you pick one of these standards, say literary elements. You click on that. This aligns it from pre-K, I think it all goes all the way, yes, look all the way through. And so this shows how you can align that standard all the way through the grade level. So there are a lot of strong supports on the State Department website there with the framework. So I encourage you to use those. Also horizontal alignment. So within grade levels, teams, grade level teams need to be working together, making sure that they are aligned to standards and aligned across, using the same language, using the same curriculum, and even though some grade levels or some classes might go a little bit faster, they have common planning and they work together and try to stay together, and that just benefits the students. vertical alignment, so between grade levels. If one class is using HMH and another class is using Saxon and or teachers pay teachers, that is not creating a strong foundation. That is not going to be solid. That will just promote gaps and cracks in the learning. So making sure the vertical alignment uses common language, common routines and procedures. One example of this is so for instance, one phonics program that I know of, it uses hand motions. Well, if not every teacher implements it with fidelity and does the hand motions, they might be leaving out the part that makes it evidence-based. That's the whole brain aspect of it. Or if they change the wording and call it sneaky E, or something different than the rest of the teachers in the same grade level and moving up through grade levels, then that just creates confusion for the students, and again promotes gaps in learning. So as a building leader, for all the building leaders out there, I used to always tell my staff, we'll teach the curriculum with fidelity, and then we can add to it, but we won't take away. So if you want to add props, or you want to, do a room transformation or add something to it, a video or some kind of visual props, but not to take away. The next component is evidence-based practices, and we could talk all day on this. Evidence-based practices include explicit instruction, so telling students what they need to know, not leaving it to chance or for them to discover. If you want them to know that this is the long A, tell them this is long A. It makes the A sound. Here is a word that starts with A. Giving them examples and telling them what you want them to learn. It also includes modeling. So showing students, this is how you make an A. This is how you say the long A sound. Show and tell them. It is not a secret. We are not trying to get them to try to figure it out on their own. And then part of modeling is actually having exemplars posted. So a lot of times if you, for instance, I have a course that I'm taking right now, and thank goodness the professor, he posts student work from other classes so that we can look and see, oh, this is what we're aiming towards. This is what it's supposed to look like. And that's really helpful too. And then of course, number 3 is scaffolding. When we're teaching a lesson, we want to make sure we're doing the I do, we do, you do, and giving them that gradual release of responsibility. All right, differentiation. So differentiation without lowering expectations. I had the wrong mindset for a long time when I was teaching, and I used to teach to the lower students. And I went to a conference one time and then realized, that is not really helping anybody. So, teaching the grade level standards, but then providing the supports that they need, that some of them need to get there. So differentiating without lowering expectations, making sure that they're all getting that grade level content, but providing those supports so that they can be successful at that. Differentiation is not set aside for tier 2 and tier 3. It happens right there in real time in the classroom, and based on formative assessments, which Emily's going to touch on here in just a little bit. Differentiated is provided in class, so it doesn't happen when they leave class to maybe go to a resource room or something. It actually happens right there in class. Like I said, it's based on formative assessments. So when you're providing or delivering a lesson, you're walking around looking at the work that students are doing. you're doing thumbs up or thumbs down if they understand or not. They're using whiteboards to show you answers so you can walk around and assess the understanding of the classroom. It could be also be a quick check or a skill check at the end of the lesson to see the level of understanding, and then provide supports based on that. Differentiation happens in real time, on the spot, even during whole groups. So students in the middle of a lesson, you might realize that somebody needs a visual or more work, and then so that you pull them over to a small group afterwards. And then it's also culturally responsive. So when you have students that have different needs in that way, that you're providing that and providing materials that that speak to that. And then also supports ELs and students with disabilities, following your IEPs and offering those supports and posting pictures and giving visuals for your EL students to support them. So those are all the different ways you can differentiate your Tier 1 lessons. And then engagement is huge. So you want to make sure that more than 80% of your students are engaged. This could include using multimodal ways of delivering a lesson, giving visuals, using songs, music, whatever you need to do to keep your students engaged. Making sure that you're, which is number 6, asking questions, giving multiple times for them to respond. Making them relevant, making your lessons relevant. Why do they need to learn this? And especially if there's a real world application, if they can see how they're going to use this later or why it's important. Why do we need to learn how to read these words? Well, so you can read a menu when you go out to eat. So you can go to the grocery store and read the backs of a label or whatever makes it apply to the real world. And then includes collaboration. So letting students talk back and forth, having turn and talks, giving them time to think, pair, and share. And then of course your question, your Q&R techniques, giving them wait time and having a system for calling on students. So you're not just calling on the students that have their hand raised. I never did that. I wouldn't say never. I got to where I wouldn't do that because if they think you're going to call on those same 3 people every time you have a question, then they're not even going to think. And letting students blurt out, as soon as someone blurts out an answer, then everyone else quits thinking. So making sure you have routines for that will improve your engagement. And then making sure there is access for all learners, your EL, students with disabilities, and other considerations. We have multiple things happening in each class. Each class is different, so providing whatever they need to access the content. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Emily, and she's going to talk to you guys about assessments and data.
Thank you, Marlo. That was in like one short section already, I think, very enlightening into what really, when we're looking at Tier 1, what we're trying to address as it relates to using MTSS to inform our practices, right? To inform our decision making and what we're doing. And that's where, when we lead into assessments and data, the true definition of the word data is information. And so often when I think data came to the forefront and we started using data as a profession, in education to inform some of our decision making, people were like, kids are not just a number, they're not just data. And so often, I had to remind my parents, whether I was in an instructional leader role, I was in the classroom, I was coaching teachers, to see it beyond the fact that they're numbers, is that data is simply information. And we need information as professionals to make the best decisions that we can, right? Why do we check the stock market? Why do we look at how the Dow did or how the Nasdaq, right? Because that data, that information informs if we're buying, if we're selling, if we're, it gives us an understanding of the pulse of the economy, just like assessment and data. I don't think that as a practice we should over test our students or that kids are just numbers. But Peter Drucker says it perfectly. What gets measured gets improved, right? If we're looking at it and we're using information, which is what data is, to inform our practices, we get that information from our assessments. I never liked teaching to the test, or that, if we had a test, that's what we're teaching kids to. I was a true believer that our job is to teach kids how to think, right? How to be critical thinkers, how to be problem solvers. And then that is cross-curricular, right? We can apply that thinking process to any subject. Math, science, social studies, and we use the assessment and the data to inform our practice, right? Tier 1 instruction needs to be strengthened by looking at the components that we just talked about. So, Marla, will you hit the next slide?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, don't be sorry.
I forgot I was still in charge of that. Okay.
No worries. I can take over if you want. I don't mind. Right.
No,
so when we talk about assessment and data, it can incorporate quite a few different pieces or components, right? So assessment and data is our universal screener, our formative assessments, and data review. And when we talk about universal screener, that is our BOY or MRY or EOY, right? That is that norm reference test that we use to assess how our students are doing in relation to other students in that grade across the country, nationally, right? How are we doing, whether we're looking at it through STAR, we're looking at it through MIRA or NWEA. That universal screener is our first point of contact, that first piece of information that lets us know how to inform what we're going to do. Formative assessments are just that, right? They can be quick, they're observational, very similar to what Marlo was talking about earlier, and then those data reviews, right? If we just test kids and we get this information but don't do anything with it, without reviewing it, we're not making informed decisions from it, then we are just testing kids. That universal screener, if we're looking at universal screener, there is legislature for that, right? It is mandated K-3 that we use an approved screener. That universal screener, when we think about it, is informing those early reading years, right? Those early elementary years where we know that research says if kids are not proficient in reading by 3rd grade, it becomes more and more difficult to catch them up. And so that universal screener is a systemic process for identifying students who may be at risk, right? It could have just been a bad day. We understand that, right? And that's why I always said that data it was triangulation, right? You use that one point in time on that particular day, because it may have just been a bad day, but it also may mean there's something we're missing in our observation as a teacher or our observation as an instructional leader. So it helps us to inform outcomes, right? We look at it, as I mentioned earlier, 3 times a year. It drives the MTSS framework, and it signals when to administer, right? Like, when do we need to be reevaluating and progress monitoring what that information or data is telling us? We think of it like a health screener, right? Like, how many of you go to the doctor regularly, right? We do yearly visits, but if you have maybe an underlying health condition, you may have to go a couple times a year for them to assess, is the medicine working, right? Is the protocol they put in place on target for making improvements in your overall health? And that's what that state approved screener for K-3 is. There's a great link in here, and I don't know that we'll have much time to play with it, but I believe this presentation will be shared out with you. And we think more and more students are making it to subsequent grades past the third, not reading on grade level. We've got 8th grade teachers who are like, I'm not a reading teacher, or you've got 12th grade teachers who are like, I'm not but yet their kids can't read what they need them to. And so there are other tools that we can use to inform our practices. When we think about formative assessments, right, that's that diagnostic tool, right, given to students who do not meet grade level benchmarks. So you give your screener and you've got kids who are green. And I always hate to refer to students or learners as colors, but it's kind of what has defined this process a little bit. You've got them, they're green. We know that they're on track to be proficient. They're on track to be on grade level. We're yellow. There are warning students. Hey, there are bubbles. There might be missing something. There might be a small gap with some quick interventions with a tier 2 targeted, specific lesson. They're just going to get right back on track. And then we have those red that might alert us to a bigger problem. And so we always hope that there's just a few in that market, right? In that targeted, specific, focused area. So when we think about examples, what does that mean? How do I check that? What's a screener? What's a diagnostic I could use? We think about phonics screeners, right? We drill down to the specific skill. My students keep saying, they don't know that AI makes a long A sound, right? They don't know that EE and EA can make a long E sound, or when that happens. They don't know why C is soft, and they don't know the rule like before an I or an E or a Y, right? You drill down into that to help give them the skills that they need to inform the gap, right? And to really close the gap. So that information informs our interventions. Very specifically, we use that diagnostic and say, we're going to fill that gap. We're going to inform the missing piece, really, in through that intervention. So we think about it like blood work too, from an MRI, right? If you go to a checkup, it shows the problem. I remember I was probably 47, maybe. I was teaching 3rd grade, and I went to the nurse because I was having like these black spots, and I remember I was like lightheaded a lot, and I'd stand up after I was teaching a lesson, or I was walking around, and I went to her and I was like, Dawn, can you check my blood pressure? And she'd be like, Emily, your blood pressure's like 140 over 90. And I'd be like, oh, that's fine. And she's like, no, that's not fine. I was like, I'm probably just stressed out here. I'm at work. Let's check it in a few days. So I had her check it like every day for a week. And she said, Emma, I think there's something wrong with you. And I went, and there was like several other underlining, and now I'm on good medicine and I'm under control. But I had to go back a couple times to make sure that what we were doing was fixing the problem. I didn't ignore it because there was a crack in my foundation, to kind of go back to our original analogy. So we have to update periodically what we're doing. We have to make sure that we are informing our decision making with that information, and reteaching, or pulling small groups, or adjusting our instruction to make sure that we are meeting the needs of our students. We also look at formative assessment as ongoing and daily, right? We think about what is happening during our instruction time and how that data and that information can guide our practices in real time. There's some great examples here. It's that observation. We are the experts. As instructional leaders, you need to trust and know that the teachers you have in your classroom are making great decisions, whether it be through, teaming meetings you're having where you're talking about observations and things they're seeing in the classroom, specific exit tickets that are informing quickly if students are on track with that tier 1 instruction. Did they get your lesson today? Did they get that standard? Marlo gave a couple other good examples, like the whiteboards, digital responses, quizzes, Quizlets, Kahoots, Lookits, Kids Love, all of those interactive, immediate formative information for us. It helps determine then how we differentiate. You know, I say that we think we're going to just open our teacher's manual or a teacher's book and we're going to read it exactly the way the experts spelled it out for us, and we're going to follow the framework and our kids are going to get it. Well, in a perfect world, that is how it would be, and that would probably make retention in teaching a lot easier or maybe a lot better, but we know that that's not always how it plays out. And so how do we respond to that? How do we differentiate in real time when we're noticing students aren't getting it? Can we pivot while still providing that tier 1 instruction with fidelity, right? You know, Marlon made a great point that we cannot deviate from the plan, right? We can't deviate from the instruction. We can't take stuff out, we can add, but we can't take away. And so when we get the information that's informing our instruction, are we pivoting and making good differentiated decisions immediately, right? To help us form our small groups, those flexible groups. And are we using it to inform or reteach? Are we flexible enough in our instruction to say, I only planned one day for 2x2 multiplication and they didn't get it, but I'm moving on tomorrow. And so tomorrow we're doing 3x2. If they don't have 2x2, they can't do 3x2. So how are we informing our decision making to ensure that that 80 to 85%, you know, we always target 100. We want 100% of our students to be getting that tier 1, but we realize that's not reality. And so how are we responding to that? When we think about continual data review, right, that's that progress monitoring. Kind of goes back to my example of going to the doctor. You know, every 3 months, they're like, Emily, we want to check your A1C. Ugh. But it's October, November, December. You always want to check it in December. It's never good, right? It's Halloween, it's Thanksgiving, it's Christmas, or it's, you know, it's the holidays. And so when we are progress monitoring, we have to understand that, yes, students are going to have bad days. There's going to be things that get in the way, but that progress monitoring between benchmarks is the best line of defense to inform the effectiveness of our interventions and our tier 1 instruction. It's the purpose of our teaming. It's why we need to have good schedules in place. It's why we have to stop and take time to look at that student level data. I remember I was I was very intentional about making sure that teaming meetings were happening in my district when I was a principal. And I remember I had some teacher pushback and they were like, this is my plan time. I need to plan. And I said, well, there's a difference between planning and making copies. And you want your time to stand at the copier to make copies. That's not planning. What we are doing in our teaming meetings is we are looking at data, we are looking at information, and we are creating a true plan, a plan that is responding to what the information is telling us. And so if you're not being intentional in making time for that and holding meetings and opportunities to ensure fidelity in the foundation, then you're going to have a lot of cracks along the way. And so it's incredibly important that you are monitoring that either monthly, quarterly, ensuring that that progress monitoring is happening and that you are giving time in the schedule as instructional leaders to your teachers to talk about that and have meaningful, intentional conversations to inform their practices. 6 weeks is a good time, is a good amount of time to progress monitor. Sometimes if you're in the tier 3, it's definitely more often. It needs to be quick and it is designed to be preventative. We talk about continual data review, and what better than that circle, right? It's a cycle, the cycle of continuous improvement. As professionals, that should be what we strive for, right? We need to identify that problem. That's what that screener is. And then we need to use that diagnostic to identify maybe more specific what the problem is. So the screener tells us there's a problem. The diagnostic pinpoints the problem, right? It narrows it down more. Then we start to talk about, well, what do we do? What should we do? Because they're not they're not on track. And then that plan implementation, that fidelity data, that's when we're having those team meetings and we're talking about the plan, truly using our plan time to make informed decisions. And then that plan evaluation, is it working? If you don't come back to look at the data, you just give it and then move on, you're not evaluating if what you're doing at that tier 1 level in the classroom is truly working. And that is, I think, is a great segue into environment and behavior. We know there's a direct correlation between student behavior and the student and the learning environment to academic growth. And so students rise to the level of the relationships and expectations we set. So often, as professionals, we ask for an agenda. We want to see an agenda before we sign up for a webinar, or we want to see, the expectations of a course or a certification we're signing up for. Why do we want to do that? Because we thrive as humans, right? Whether we're 6, 3, 5, 51, we thrive as humans in knowing what is expected of us, knowing that we're going to get feedback and have routines that we feel safe in and comfortable with. And so that classroom environment and the behavior expectations that we set as instructional leaders of our buildings, I think permeate to the classroom level. So it's not necessarily just that, I have a teacher that never has behavior referrals. Well, why don't they? Right? What's happening there? You can use data across the board, whether it be academic or behavioral, to really inform decisions that you make. A great example that we talk a lot about in our office is matrices. We make matrices all the time. And here's a great example. If you have clear expectations, right? Keeping it simple. In our school, in our building, in our district, we are respectful, we're responsible, and we're safe. And this is what it looks like. If we're in the bathroom, if we're in the classroom, if we're walking to group instruction, if we're in the computer lab, if we're in the library, right? It should not matter where they are. There should be clear, defined expectations and routines that really help lead and guide the process. Feedback, it should be timely, explicit, positive, and it should always move learning forward. I was doing something with a teammate and we were taking a certification, and we did this test and it didn't give us a score. It did not give us a score. And she was like, what did I get on it? I go, I don't know. And she's like, I need to know what I got on it. No matter how old we are, whether we're adult learners, young learners, that immediate timely feedback helps us feel confident and comfortable in either, are we meeting behavioral expectations? Are we performing academically where we need to be? And yes, as educators, we always want our students, to not have issues. We don't want them to, to be struggling. But what we need to understand is that positive reinforcement is critical in informing change. Thinking just about how stop running versus I really love how you're using walking feet in the hallway. Thank you. Same message, different tone, probably a different response. And so when we think about those routines, that clear, predictable structure is great, but it has to be taught and it has to be practiced, and you have to hold kids to it. I had a PK teacher say to me one time, Trowbridge was genius. I never thought it, but we actually are teaching behavior. I said, yes. You are teaching your 4-year-olds how to behave. You are teaching, and that's why they come to school, right? They teach their brothers and they treat their brothers and sisters different than they're going to treat their classmates. And that's where that starts. So leading into the routines and the cultural responsiveness, we are all raised different. I read something the other day about, bringing marriage, right? And you're bringing the way you were brought up and raised, and your spouses, the way your spouse was brought up and raised, and you're trying to figure out what that looks like for your new family. And so in a lot of ways, when you're in a school structure, you know, in a school environment, how family structure is for your students, your even your teachers, you know, as instructional leaders, if you need to know what your currency is, right? That language barrier, the belief system, you know, in some cultures, it's not okay to question, right? It's not okay to raise your voice. I'm a loud person naturally. I'm Italian and Polish. I'm a little loud and stubborn, and so like I get very excited and passionate, and my voice gets loud. And I used to have students who were like, "Are you mad at us?" And I was like, "No, I'm so excited," right? And so it takes time for, I think, that to get to know your students and build those relationships can have impact in how you inform what you're doing.
Okay, thank you, Emily, for sharing your insights on that. Oh, really great stuff, and super important for building a strong foundation. We are closing in on 4 o'clock, so I'm going to have to really go fast. And I don't know if there have been any questions posted yet in the chat, but hopefully we have time to get to that too. Just real quick, I want to touch on leadership because it's so very important to Tier 1. Actually, the whole MTSS framework. Principals are second only to teachers among school-related factors that affect student learning. And that's from the Wallace Foundation, How Leadership Influences Student Learning. Let's look at the role of leadership in MTSS. Leadership ensures MTSS is implemented with consistency, clarity, and sustainability. If the leader is not on board and doesn't have a vision for it, it is probably not going to be sustainable. So there are some key levers that you can utilize, that leadership can utilize to make sure the MTSS is implemented with consistency, clarity, and sustainability. And those are walkthroughs, collaborative planning time, professional development, and fidelity checks. So instructional walkthroughs are just monumental to this. Their purpose is to monitor Tier 1 instruction and ensure alignment with MTSS goals. Leaders observe for evidence-based practices, student engagement, and differentiation, and they use walkthrough data to guide coaching and support. I will hop over and click on this real quick. So I just threw together a leadership walkthrough checklist that we will include in this. And this is something you can use as a walkthrough form, or use it in a meeting to talk about things that your school needs to improve on. And so just like Emily said earlier, what gets measured, you know, will get improved. And so if you're looking at the what's going on with Tier 1 instruction and then focusing on the needs there, then your Tier 1 will improve for sure. Leaders are tasked with making sure there's collaborative planning time in the schedules. And you are empowering teams through planning content. Leaders protect time for grade level and cross-tier collaboration. It has to be built in there somewhere. Teams analyze data, align instruction, and plan interventions during this time. It promotes shared ownership of student outcomes. And then all staff members take responsibility, even in the non-testing grades. So all of that comes down from leadership, making sure that that's the tone and the vision of the building. Professional development is huge. Building capacity through PD content. You know, sometimes people don't know what they don't know. And so you can use that walkthrough checklist to focus on MTSS practices that are lacking in your school. So PD focuses on MTSS practices, data literacy, and instructional strategies. Leaders model learning and provide job embedded PD that is ongoing through staff meetings, PLC meetings, newsletters. I always stuck in a little corner, a little snippet of something that I wanted everyone to know. And it didn't take much, just, a couple of words, but MTSS was always an ongoing thing in our building. We talked about it in the hallway. It was in our newsletters. We talked about it in our data meetings, in our PLCs. And so it was just the way we did things. It was our culture. And so threading PD through multiple ways, a bulletin board in the workroom even. I had a Scarborough's reading rope made out of tablecloths in our workroom. All of those things, making sure that it's just part of the culture. And then you can align, like I said, your PD with your walkthrough and fidelity data. In what areas are educators needing support in your building? And then the use of fidelity checks. I love a checklist. I love a fidelity checklist. Leaders can use tools like rubrics, checklists, coaching logs to monitor MTSS practices in your building. You have to have a way to measure what's being done. And then fidelity checks also help identify gaps and celebrate successes. And so not forgetting that you want to keep an eye on the positive things that are happening. Highlight what staff is doing well, and even let them share what they're doing and how they're doing it, maybe at staff meetings or PLC meetings. But keeping an eye on the positive is a great culture builder, and it also builds teacher efficacy. And then data informs next steps in PD and support. Okay, outcomes and continuous improvement. Emily, are you doing this or is this me?
I think we both can in some ways. We only have 2 slides on it and we're about a minute over,
and we're a minute over already.
Yeah, but I think it's just important to understand that MTSS, as Marlo said, is not a prescribed program in some way. It's not just like you can do it. It's a mindset. It's a way of thinking and running your building as instructional leaders, and continuous improvement. It's constantly looking at the process and using information and data to inform improvement. From behavior to academic, from tier 1, is the core curriculum I have working? If it's not, we need to pivot. If I have so many teachers who were not on board when we bought it, then I need to get a training. And it goes back to that professional development, right? Our outcomes are only as great as the practices we're putting in place and the reflective approach to continuous improvement that we use as we look at refining and improving our process.
So we want at least 80% of our students meeting tier 1. If we're really doing all of those things that we talked about in tier 1, then we should have 80% of our kiddos meeting benchmark. If not, we need to look at what area it is, and that's where that fidelity checklist comes into play. If you were part of the SPDEG module this month, you did the tier 1 audit. I downloaded a PDF of it. I hope that was okay, Wendy and everybody, and included it in this last slide. So you guys can use this as a deliverable. We will email this presentation out to everybody that's on the call today. But you can go through and just do a tier 1 audit of your school and see where if it's present and consistent, if it's in progress but inconsistent, or not yet in place, and then see where to start. So this is a great tool for sure. Shout out to whoever created that. So I think that's
yeah, and I would just want to end with, give yourself grace. I think so often we think that it needs to be done overnight, and it is, continuous improvement is about understanding that we're always evolving. And we're, our students are evolving, our teachers are evolving, the educational climate is evolving, the platform in which we deliver our profession is evolving. And so, give yourself grace. And as long as in my opinion, and that's all it is as long as you are reviewing outcomes and thinking about how you can get better, the process will work.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Marlo and Emily. I mean, going through tier 1 foundations in 45 minutes is quite the task that we
It's
have
tough.
asked for you to do. And I do love that MTSS is a mindset. I think I'm going to make a t-shirt that has that on there. I appreciate that. We did have a question about the call on Tuesday. Is this the same information? If they're talking about the Spark community of practice, then that would be separate information unless there's another call that I'm not aware of that's going to be on Tuesday. So,
Wendy, there is a MTSS administrators call on November 4th. That is a Tuesday, so I don't know if they're
Okay.
talking about that. This is not the same. The little part that I had to run through about it with administrators, some of that could be part of that, but not this. Will not be the same thing.
Okay. All right. Thank you
that
so
helps.
much. Marlo, Emily, thank you so much for joining us and providing that information. It will be recorded, and Benjamin will be putting that up on our Facebook page and along with our module. Our module is the SPDEG Implementation Year 1 Cohort 2 on OSDE Connect. We will be having another MTSS Community of Practice next month. It's going to be a week earlier. We usually have them the last week of the month, but because of Thanksgiving, which is already coming up, it will be the week earlier. And we will be focusing on assessments and assessing students. We'll dive a little bit deeper into that. If anybody has any other questions, please feel free to email me at wendy.hardwick@sde.ok.gov. Thank you so much, and we will see you next month. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.